Hi, and welcome to my kitchen. My name is James Jenkins, and today you're going to watch me cook a recipe that takes root in my family's Puerto Rican heritage. Due to COVID-19, I was actually unable to buy the plantain bananas that are required to make the tostones with mojo. If you're following the recipe that comes attached to this video, you're going to see that that was part of it, but I was unable to buy them. So with that said, I'm going to start caramelizing the sugar that's required to make the flan, and we're going to start by preheating our pan over low heat and then just pouring in 1 cup of sugar into the pan. And this is going to require constant stirring because you don't want to burn the sugar and you want to melt all of it until you caramelize sugar. So I'm gonna wait for this to heat up and then I'll get back with you whenever it's the process is started. So as you can see, after about 5 minutes or so of stirring, it's gonna start getting clumpy, which is okay, but just keep continually stirring it until all of the clumps are melted. So as you can see, this is pretty much melted already. So now at this point, we're gonna turn off the fire and then we're going to pour it into the pan that we're gonna use for the flan. You can use either this tubular pan or you can use a flat pan. I'll show you here in just a second. So once all the caramel is in there, let's scrape it off with this. Once all the caramel is in the pan, you can either leave it on the bottom, but I like to spread it about 1 inch covering the sides, just like this. That way, whenever the flan gets baked, it actually drips down onto the sides. And then you can just leave the bottom in there like that. If you don't have one of those tubular pans, you can also use one of these flat pans like this and then just cover it on the sides right there. So we're gonna set this to the side and let it harden, and then I'll meet you over at the blender where we're gonna cream the cream cheese and all of the other ingredients together. So here I am in front of the blender, and we're gonna start incorporating the milks and the cream cheese together in the blender. So let's pour the whole milk in first. Don't put the cream cheese in first because it's gonna stick to the blade of the blender. Always put 1 milk in first. Then you put the cream cheese, then the evaporated milk, and then the condensed milk. So then just pop the lid on and then turn it on for about 2 minutes so that all the ingredients can incorporate themselves together. So after about 2 minutes, then you add the eggs, the vanilla, and the lemon zest to the blender. This you don't want to blend for more than 15 seconds really. What we're going to do is just pour the flan mixture straight into the pan. And if you hear some cracking like you do right now, that's simply because the cold mixture of the flan is mixing with the warm caramel. So here I am in front of the oven. I have my oven preheated already to 375. I have my deep dish in the oven the entire time to keep it hot. And then I have some boiling water here on the stove. You want to pour a little bit of boiling water in the deep dish before you add your flan pan into this. So very carefully add your flan pan to the hot water bath in the oven. And then very carefully add the rest of your boiling water so as to not get water inside the flan. You want to add it to where the flan pan is about halfway covered, and that is about halfway right there. And then you're going to want to bake this for about 1.5 hours. Perfect. Shut the oven, bake it for about 1.5 hours, and then I'll see you when we start cooking the rice. Okay, so 1.5 hours later, the flan is now out of the oven and on the countertop. So now we're going to test to see if it's done by taking a toothpick or a metal toothpick, sticking it in, and if it comes out clean, then it's done, which it did. So now we're gonna let this cool down while we make the dinner itself. So now I'm gonna start cooking the dinner itself, and I'm going to start with the rice. For those of you who don't know, rice doubles in size when you cook it. So 1 cup of dry rice is gonna yield 2 cups of cooked rice. And the ratio of rice to water that you use is gonna be 1 to 2. So I'm gonna be cooking 2 cups of rice and that means I have 4 cups of water, which is already in the rice pot here. So I'm just gonna pour the rice in. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then we're going to add about 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt and 1/8 of a teaspoon of olive oil, just for a little bit of taste. Once you have all of these in the rice pot, you just put the lid on, turn it on, and let it go. So now we're gonna start cooking the sofrito, and we have a preheated pan on the stove top here. There's already oil in there, enough to cover the bottom of the pan and enough to cover this amount of vegetables. So then you're just going to combine all of these ingredients into the pan. And then we also have all of the dry spices here. These are all measured out, and they're all in the ingredients list, which is attached to this video, so you can check that out and see how much of each we have. So you just combine all of them together in this frying pan here. Stir them up until it's well incorporated. And then whenever you cover it, you're gonna wanna let this cook for probably about 20 minutes. So I have opened up the can of beans here, and we're gonna start cooking these on very low heat. We're gonna let those heat up for at the same time that we're cooking this. So originally I said this would take about 20 minutes to cook, but since it's on a gas stove and there's a little bit less than I normally cook, it probably took about 10 minutes. So this is what it looks like, the sofrito, whenever it's fully cooked. Now, what you wanna do is pour it straight into the pot of black beans here. You also want to add some water to the mixture because this is gonna be a very thick mixture. So I have about half a can of water here. And then we're gonna also add a medium-sized potato, also about 2 ounces of fresh cilantro. And then I'm gonna add a little bit more water. So we're gonna let this cook for probably about 45 minutes or so. And then in the meantime, we'll start cooking the steak. All right, so the beans have been cooking for about 45 minutes on low heat, and this is what they look like when they're done. So right here, I have a cast iron skillet, which I've preheated, and you wanna preheat it until you see smoke start rising up from it. At that point, you wanna add a decent amount of olive oil to the bottom of the pan, and then spread it around with a basting brush. That way you get good coverage of the bottom of the pan, all right? Immediately, you want to drop the steaks in the pan, that way they get seared on both sides. This is how you'll know if the steaks get seared whenever you hear this sound. That lets you know that the steak gets seared. If you put it in any earlier, then they won't get seared. So now we're gonna let these cook. So these steaks have been cooking for about 5 minutes on the first side here, and I'm gonna show you what the sear looks like. That way you can gauge it for yourself whenever you cook your own steaks. That's a good sear. I don't know if you can see it very well from there. Here's the second steak. About 5 more minutes there. Once they cook for about 5 more minutes, we're gonna take them off the heat and then let them rest inside of a closed Tupperware dish. That way they can keep cooking. So the salad that I'm eating today is a sweet kale salad, which consists of chopped green cabbage, kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and radicchio. There's also some dried cranberries and roasted pumpkin seeds. I'm also adding some feta cheese to it, and the dressing that I'm using is a poppy seed dressing, but you can use any salad that you want just to complement the meal. So this is the finished product of the dinner. This is what it looks like plated up. And now I'm going to dig in, and I'll hit you back whenever we get to the flan. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here is the finished product of the flan. This has been refrigerated for about 12 hours. And before we can flip it over, the edges have to be scored. So you just take a knife, insert it at one of the edges and free it from the sides. That way you can flip it. This one's already been done, so now I'm gonna flip it. So you just take a dish, put it over the top, and then very carefully invert it like so. So good. So here is the finished product. I'm gonna cut myself a piece. Then you can get a little bit of the sugar from the bottom. Kind of like that. And then you just take a bite. God, that's so good. I want to thank you guys so much for staying to the end of the video and watching it. And bon appetit.